Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to you and on this kind of half spring morning, which is encouraging to see. We have some exceptional speakers for you over the next 2 hours to discuss this very important issue, and I think it is going to raise all kinds of questions that I hope you enjoy. It's not hard to realize that the pandemic has really laid bare many long-standing vulnerabilities and risks which were already existing within the supply chain that have come to the fore. However, it's also creating, opening up new opportunities for innovation, for new thinking and growth in the new landscape that is yet to emerge. And this is what we really want to explore this morning. Overall, it's demonstrated the power of an interconnected digital supply chain network, which could potentially be more effective. But again, is that correct? Or again, will that change? The pandemic has also highlighted to most organizations that probably they need to change and change more than probably has been expected. But what might supply chain networks in the future, post-pandemic world look like? And again, we want to explore that today. At the same time, a recent CDP report stated that the supply chain is 11.4 times higher in emissions than company operations. Now that obviously raises a number of key points, because it's very hard to have us talk about sustainability if the supply chain itself is unsustainable. So how is this going to be corrected, and how can technology change the way that the supply chain can be managed? These are all points that we want to discuss today. Now, during this, I'll introduce the speakers now in a second. But first, let's just bring Lauren in, if that's okay, to ask a few polling questions.
Hi, yes, good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us. We always are very keen to get your opinion on things, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind answering a few with us. Now, we've had the PM's address on Monday, and I was wondering if that has made you feel slightly more optimistic about business recovery. Well, it is encouraging to see. So 90% of you are feeling encouraged. I'm thrilled. And there was some rumors that not everybody was trusting of that. Second question is, some of us argue that the economy is expected to bounce back, and some argue that it's going to be bouncing back by around 8% after June 2020. And I wondered if you agreed with that perspective being put out to market. This one's slightly more encouraging. So 86% of you agree that we are looking at a bounce back of around 8% after June, hopefully higher. Next quick question. Do you think that the focus that the pandemic has put on localism, do you think that that is going to still exist and still be as strong as what it is now post-COVID? We've spoken a lot about the local economy, and I think that is the hope. Gosh, and your opinion is quite split on this one. So 59% of you versus 41% feel that localism is going to be as important. And final quick question is, do you think that the supply chain will radically change post-pandemic? Do you think it already has changed? Gosh. It's going to make a very interesting conversation. I wonder if your views will have changed by the end of today's session. That's very interesting to see that you think that it will not. So David Reed has his job cut out for him this morning, that's for sure. Thank you very much for answering that. That really does help set the tone.
Thanks, Lauren, that's great. There's a Q&A button, please, so feel free to ask questions as you go through today, and we will endeavour to answer every question either during this or straight afterwards as well, so rest assured we will come back to you. We have some great speakers as outlined. David, I'm going to introduce in a minute, is going to really talk about the real questions facing supply chain management and what we've got to consider. He's then going to introduce Attentive, who are going to explore data-driven food supply chains and how it impacts on the food service sector. They're going to ask the questions of you, how can the use of data change supply chains? Has the industry sometimes been too siloed in the past, and can it work better together? And could industry collaborate far better? Which actually, just given some of the answers we've just seen, actually are obviously quite key topics for us to look at. Then we're delighted to welcome Andrew Mayne, the founder of Certec Exchange and former chief executive of Aramark UK, who's going to talk about the kind of move from the traditional view of the supply chain, the transformational issues, and the kind of move towards a much more customer-centric view of it and the ecosystem. So this kind of supply ecosystem, which will be fascinating to listen to as well, and how technology is impacting on that. We're then going to have a panel discussion where we're delighted to welcome both Mark Zornes, the founder of Winnow, to come and talk, and Mark Frankel, a director of Amadeus, who along with Andrew will come and answer a Q&A with me. So it should be a fascinating 2 hours, and it'll be interesting to see how your views change or are influenced over that next 2 hours. So thank you for being with us. Firstly, let me introduce David. David Reed has been a great friend to EP over the years. He's chairman of Prestige Purchasing. Is a great advocate for how we need to think differently about the supply chain and what needs to happen. David, over to you.
Good morning, and good morning, everyone. I am going to start by loading some slides, which I'd like to share with you, if I may. So there'll be a slight pause while mature gentleman navigates technology. So just thought I'd start by saying who I am. For those of you that don't know me, and I'm sure there'll be many, my name is David Reed. I'm the founder and chairman of a business called Prestige Purchasing. What we do is we help operators in the hospitality sector deliver affordable supply chain cost reduction. So what essentially we focus on is simplification, reduction in cost, and maximization of margin, but we do it through data and skills, and that's a very important part of our difference from our competition. So we've all spent a year now being impacted by coronavirus, and in that time many businesses in our sector, both in the supply chain actually and operators themselves, have failed, and pretty much every other business has struggled to some degree, and some a great deal. There's a saying we've all heard many times since last March: don't waste a good crisis. And it's true, times like these are invariably the moments when the most innovation happens, and when the fear of failure drives us to think the unthinkable. And that's certainly been the case in my business and many others I've seen. So as we approach what we all hope will be the end phase of this crisis, it feels like a good time to stand back and look hard at the food and drink system that we've created. So the first question might well be, why do we need a food system at all? If we all grew and reared our own food, as our ancient distant ancestors did, well, it would be much, much simpler. But food retailing and eating away from home are now huge industries, which we all play an active and happy part in most of the time, because we don't want to do that anymore. As a supply chain person, I'm intrigued by food. It's the most complex of supply chains that you can imagine. If you think about temperature, for example, food arrives now chilled, ambient, frozen, even super frozen in some cases, in many, many different formats: raw, cooked, pickled, salted, dried, to name but a few. And food is is distinct in the sense that it's joyful. We all love it. We all love eating, but it's also potentially deadly if not transported and prepared safely. And it's also nutritious. It's actually what keeps us alive, but eat too much of the wrong things and it's really, really bad for your health. So for the past century, the struggle of mankind has been to produce enough food at a cost that citizens can actually afford. But now it's not really about that anymore. We're now realizing that the very process of creating food for our fellow citizens can, if carried out badly, have a really seriously negative impact on our environment, both close to home and further afield. And there's a list of 7 different areas there that are very significant, potentially negative impacts. Our consumers are rightly becoming increasingly sensitive to those impacts, and they're starting to look to us as expertise and for information on the eating and drinking decisions that they make. In my view, the things that you see there listed are likely to have a bigger impact upon our futures than COVID if we don't set a new direction. And yet all of this has emerged in less than a century. This photograph, which is one of my favorite photographs, is of my father, Scott, and my grandson, Sebastian. Just 90 years separate their birth dates, but the food systems present at the 2 different dates could not be more different. The way in which we grow, supply, and prepare food have changed. We've got much more sophistication, but now we have much more complexity and way more waste. This is what farming looked like in 1926 when my father was born. Small fields, organic production, as you can see, very limited mechanization and local supply. Food went mostly straight from farm to shop. And shops, well, they look like this. After slaughter, whole carcasses were sold and butchered at the rear of a butcher's premises, for example. Catering premises, such as they were in 1926, were mostly supplied from local shops on a delivery basis. When my father was a child, there was very little in the way of food imports. Some non-native fruits like bananas had begun to appear, and meat products generally had to be processed, like this corned beef, to stand the long journeys that were required. And around this time, businesses started to develop a wider product range, one of which was Sainsbury, who by the 1930s began to open branches on many busy high streets. But it would take until the 1960s and the advent of stronger competition for the self-service model that we all know well today to emerge. This encouraged retailers to take larger premises, stock more varied product and lower prices. So by the 1970s, the long decline and the long slow decline of specialist fishmongers, butchers and greengrocers had begun. But it was in the 1980s that the most significant changes to our food system actually happened. The emergence of hub and spoke distribution linked to farm gate haulage by the retailers and the out-of-town superstores had a massive impact on both the cost and the quality of food, and also created international supply chains direct into all of our shops for the first time. I'm rather frightened by that picture, by the way, because it has sort of Russian military parade echoes, it feels to me. But this model was emulated to a degree by familiar faces in the hospitality sector. So let's look at the difference between retail which I've spoken a lot about already, and hospitality. There are some really big differences between the two. Take a look at this, for example. Gross value add, this is an ONS set of numbers, retail versus out of home. So food and drink retailing is this was in 2018, was 30.1 billion. And that was 90% of that 30, so 27 billion was 10 businesses, all the big supermarket chains and similar. Hospitality actually had a greater gross value add at 36 billion, but that was from 186,000 businesses. That level of complexity is enormous. The largest UK caterer in the UK today is Compass, which has a turnover pre-COVID of about 2 billion. The largest UK retailer is Tesco, with 26 times that level of turnover. So there is a big difference between retail and hospitality supply chains. Retail supply chains are all about scale and simplicity, which deliver transparency and control. Hospitality supply chains, historically at least, have been about diversity and complexity, but also delivering speed and innovation. And a lot of that innovation has been happening not just in supply chain, but across the piece in hospitality in this last year. You know, you think about what we've seen this year, introduction of takeaway, delivery, order at table, pay at table, home food kits, products sold in retail. Those are business-changing innovations for the hospitality sector. And almost all have been driven by investment in technology. So let's just take a quick look at a hospitality supply chain. Typically, a product will flow through producer, processor, manufacturer, wholesaler, into a restaurant and into the consumer's mouth. And that requires product knowledge flowing down the supply chain towards the consumer, and needs knowledge flowing back up the supply chain, back towards the producer. But one of the things that's most important these days is that we have historically built up a pattern of buying from wholesalers. And we've got some fantastic wholesalers in our sector. But what we do when we buy from wholesalers is we outsource, we abdicate really that complexity. But we're now reaching a point where customers are really starting to ask questions about provenance, about waste, about sustainability issues. So innovation, I think, is required. And Rob and Jonathan, who are going to speak in a moment, think, as I do, that more collaboration will unlock waste and cost improvements, particularly around the forecasting of demand. Another route that has started to appear, it's very early days for it, is disaggregation, where essentially some of the layers of the supply chain are removed. And there are now some suppliers who, inspired by Amazon-style technology and agile distribution platforms, are creating a disaggregated supply chain where product flows straight from producer into distributor, straight to restaurant, and straight to the consumer. That will be an interesting development for us to watch. So to set the scene for this morning's presentations, I would ask, what are the real questions facing supply chain management today? And I think there's probably 5 or 6. How can supply and hospitality deliver more transparency, more informed consumers, fresher, more nutritious product, a healthier population, but at the same time creating greater efficiency, less waste, and a reversal of the damage to the planet? And that last one is going to be very, very important to us. So I'm going to stop sharing because this is a good moment to introduce Rob McInerney from Attentive. And actually, why don't you come on screen as well, Jonathan? If I could ask you to do that. Thank you. Hi. These guys are Rob McInerney and Jonathan Matthews from Attentive. Rob and Jonathan are the co-founders of Attentive, and that is a UK technology company focused on improving performance through data-driven decisions, with a specific focus on supply chain operations and manufacturing. Rob has got a PhD in machine learning, which sounds brilliant. I'd love to have done that. He has that from the University of Oxford and founded multiple AI-focused startups. Jonathan has spent the last 10 years building digital analytics software for large enterprises. They were recently awarded an Innovate UK grant specifically to develop AI-driven technology to enable resilient food supply chains that minimize waste and maximize availability. And they're going to talk you through what they're trying to do. So over to you, Rob.
Great, thanks a lot, David. Let me share my screen as well. Great. Hopefully you can see that. I think it's really interesting, firstly, for you to highlight the difference between food retail supply chains and food service supply chains. As you know, the majority of our work so far has been focused on food manufacturing and the retail side of things. And hopefully what I'll pick up a little bit today is some of the differences that we see as well from a data perspective. But before I talk about supply chains, what I want to do is start by talking about data-driven transformation as we see it, our perspective from companies doing that successfully internally. I think once we've done that, then we can look at the opportunities that are potentially available by applying the same kind of principles across multiple businesses operating in the same supply chain. And lastly, I'll talk a bit about some of the work that we're doing to develop solutions to these challenges. We think these challenges are still unsolved. And also about the project you mentioned, funded by Innovate UK, which we certainly hope that some of the people listening today would be keen to talk to us about and potentially get involved with. So let's start by thinking about data-driven transformation from the point of view of a single business. And one of the things that I'll highlight is certainly some of the common stages that we have seen being applied by businesses that have done this successfully. So this, for me, epitomizes the problem that is really at the heart of the need for data-driven transformation at all. Today, it is very difficult to make good decisions based on data. It takes a long time to know what's going on, and that's because data is stored in lots of different places. It could be in spreadsheets, could be in email attachments, ERP systems. It's pretty cumbersome to get a good picture of what is going on quickly. And that's particularly challenging when the situation in your business is changing rapidly. So to give you an example, we've been working with an ingredients manufacturer in the UK. Now, the business as a whole is a £120 million business, but we've been dealing with a pilot project with a single business unit isolated in that business that I'd say scale-wise, in terms of people, would be equivalent to something like a mid-size food service kitchen. Now, this business, they are producing product 24 hours a day. They need to make operational decisions 24 hours a day. But it takes, a lot of the decision makers are relying on out-of-date data that takes, say, 3 days to collect. So if you're a production manager working in this business, it would take you 3 days to have an idea about what product had been produced. Equally, planners who are trying to plan which products to make on any given day were taking 3 days to know whether the plant had gone down at any point over that period. And that's because operators were putting data into spreadsheets. There were lots of different people entering the same data and same information into multiple different systems. And building a report was a very manual process. You had to aggregate data from those different systems and then manually email them out to people that need it. And actually, sometimes data was just in people's heads. And the problem with that is that the production line as a whole was experiencing a lot of unnecessary waste and inefficiencies. Now, one of the things that we saw was that by aggregating all those data sources in an automated way, they now have an almost real-time view of their business. So it now takes about an hour to see what's happened on the production line. And that means they're really able to spot opportunities to reduce waste much quicker. Actually, one of the things that they're already making significant cost savings around is optimizing, for example, their cleaning schedule. So on their production line, it's about £4,000 an hour when the production line is down, being lost. Cleaning it's a 3-hour process. They've realized just by using this data, they can already eliminate a cleaning session once a month, which is equating to £120,000 of cost savings just by putting data in one place. And because they've now got all this data in the cloud, everyone across the business is aligned on what the business needs to achieve. And that means that planning can have access to real-time data to adjust their plan if the plant goes down. And equally, the production manager can be sitting at home on the weekend, get their mobile out and have a look at the data to see if there's any things that they need to do quickly. So it's really improving productivity in multiple different areas. Now, I mentioned 3 stages that we've seen applied, taken when sort of doing this successfully. The first thing is almost always about getting data in the right place, bringing all those different data sources together and doing so in a way that isn't manual but automated. Because you want to make, when you do things manually, it takes time and there's lots of room for error. These businesses are also making sure there are mechanisms to ensure that the data they're ingesting into that single location is clean and of high quality. Now, once they've got data in a single location, then they can start to generate insights. They'll typically share the most important metrics so that everyone can see the same metrics across the business. And they'll try and use tools that will help people to make better decisions. And there could be new tools that are leveraging things like predictive analytics. So once they've got data in the same place, they're already operating off the same insights. We see that people are much more able to collaborate effectively, make decisions effectively around data. So we talked about data-driven transformation as a single business. The big question here is, what is the difference between that and managing data transformation when you're dealing with multiple different businesses across the supply chain? Oops. So, of course, if you've got inefficiencies in any of those individual businesses, those inefficiencies will compound as we involve other organizations. You're effectively building data silos on top of data silos and on top of data silos. Today it can take a long time for information to move between different businesses. What happens is that leads to a lot of waste and actually a lot of inefficiencies that are shouldered by all the businesses across that supply chain. And the problem is, if we could avoid or resolve those issues, actually we'd reduce costs for everybody, and we'd certainly improve quality and availability of the product for the end consumer. To give you another example of this, so another business that we've been working with is a food-to-go manufacturer. They have close relationships with some of the big retailers, and one of the products they make is a pasty. Now, if you think about making that pasty, there's a number of different businesses that are involved in delivering that to the consumer. The retailer is obviously there to sell the product to the consumer. They're ordering the product from the manufacturer, the company that we're dealing with. And that company has to order a whole variety of different produce and raw materials from a group of different companies. And it takes a long time for information to propagate from the retailer all the way up the supply chain to the producers. At each stage, every business is making their own forecasts on how much demand they think their business is going to experience. And they're all trying to balance making their product available against the waste that that could cause. And this is particularly a problem when things change. So one of the well-known effects in supply chains is something called the bullwhip effect. And this is caused when changes in demand, or sorry, I should say that the effect of this is that changes in demand get vastly exaggerated as you move further up the supply chain. So a small change in demand on one end appears like a very big change in demand at the other. And this is because each stage is building their own forecast, building in their own safety buffers in their stock, building in their own uncertainty, if you like, in that forecast. And then the following on businesses are building their demand forecast based on that estimation. To understand the scale of this problem, WRAP released a figure in 2018. They said that in the supply chain, there is 2.85 million tons of food waste post-farm gate with a value of £5 billion. Now, as I've mentioned, our experience is predominantly in the manufacturing and reseller side of things, and there are, of course, clear differences. You know, Dave has already mentioned that we're dealing with 10 large retailers on the food retail side versus over 100,000 food service outlets on the food service side. And because of this, you know, the concentration of retailers, they actually have a lot of leverage to push approaches up their chains, which is not the case necessarily in food service. Having said that, based on our conversation to date, we do think there is significant value in in making better use of data, in pursuing data-driven transformation projects within food service. And some of the things that we've talked to people about would be, for example, bringing customer satisfaction data together to help everybody understand what is working well, bringing inventory data together to help reduce unnecessary stock, reduce waste associated with excess stock, and data to help even people optimize their staffing levels. And it might sound a bit fanciful, and this is one of the questions that we want to really answer at the moment, is we're also looking to understand how realistic is it that in food service supply chains that people could start to share demand data, for example, with their immediate suppliers to try and make them more efficient. So core part of our work is understanding how to resolve these challenges, particularly in food supply chains. And I want to state up front that I don't believe that there are good universal solutions to these problems yet, although we do believe that the technology exists and technology is there to help us build those solutions. We've already seen from the ingredients manufacturer I mentioned that it is becoming a lot easier to get accurate single source of truth data into the hands of everyone that needs it, at least internally in businesses. And certainly over the last year, we've seen that there's a lot more businesses now using digital collaboration tools, things like Microsoft Teams, Slack, Zoom, although we haven't really yet seen these used effectively in supply chains. So in terms of solving the problem, I think back to those three stages that we've seen in terms of internal data transformation projects, and we're using that to help us inform what solution should be built here. The first part of this is creating a single source of truth for multiple businesses, and that may be something like a data repository that holds demand and planning data for multiple businesses. Of course, when we're dealing with sharing data amongst multiple businesses, we also have to be careful in terms of data security and control, and that will have to be built into any solution that's built, along with the ability to audit, for example, who has accessed your data. We're also looking at, once data is in one place, applying things like machine learning and AI to automate certain aspects of insight generation. So there are lots of good tools now for automating forecasts, for example. And finally, we've obviously got to consider collaboration tools and how they fit into this, so that we can create that environment in which people can make joint decisions around the same data. Our vision for digital supply chains is that all the businesses operating in a supply chain have access to the same real-time information. So if someone buys something, everyone can see that, or at least everyone who needs to see that can see that immediately, who could benefit from having that information. And we may, for example, have the ability to share forecasts built on that same data, so that everyone can share the same understanding of what future demand is likely to be. And in theory, this kind of technology should reduce things like the bullwhip effect. That will reduce waste and cost for everyone, and ultimately increase availability and product quality. Now, as we've mentioned, we have been fortunate enough to receive a grant from Innovate UK to do a study to look at the challenges and potential solutions to solve these challenges. We're working with the food scale manufacturer I mentioned earlier. We're looking at their supply chain, but we're also very keen to involve related sectors, especially food service, in this project. And the project is generally going to involve talking to people about the problem, really helping us quantify the scale of the opportunity and testing these solutions. Importantly to highlight today, in 6 months' time, once we finish this first phase, we're going to be applying for the follow-on funding, which is a much larger grant, and in which we would like to increase the consortium of businesses that are involved with us. We'd be very, very keen to talk to anyone who's tuning into this to see whether we could get them involved in that project as well, because we want to make sure that we're operating not just within food retail, but in these other related sectors. So in summary, we think there are plenty of opportunities to make better use of data internally in businesses. You know, this is a universal problem for almost all businesses. And certainly we think this applies to food service. Now, whilst the problems of siloed data and the other challenges around data-driven transformation compound when you consider the supply chain, so do the opportunities. And whilst there aren't any universal solutions today, if we can solve this problem, it should reduce food waste, it should reduce costs for everyone in that supply chain, and ultimately improve availability and product quality for the consumer. Just to reiterate, we're very, very keen to talk to people about the Innovate project. That's my email at the bottom there. So please do send me a message and we'd love to talk more. I'm now going to bring David and Jonathan back in, and I think we'll have a bit of a discussion.
Thanks very much, Rob. So Jonathan, I've got some questions for you. Just tell us, to begin with, just tell us a little bit more about the research project. What, exactly what are you looking to get out of it, and who you think the participants should be?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. So the research project is a 6-month feasibility study funded by Innovate UK, and we're also joined by one of our clients who was a collaborator with us in the project. And as Rob mentioned, they are a large manufacturer of food to go products. And so what we're trying to do in this project is two main things. We're trying to quantify the opportunity, the business value at stake here, and then test the feasibility of solutions. So what it'll involve is collecting significant data from the supply chain. Usually it'll be for 1 or 2 products for our food to go manufacturer, for example, and having various interviews with the different participants in the supply chain, because it's really important that we understand the human side as well as the technical side of this type of initiative. And what we want to make sure we're doing is that all of the participants are getting some value from this as well, some immediate value. So what we would do at the beginning of the project is sit down together in a workshop and brainstorm what can we do from a consulting perspective that will give you some immediate value. So some examples would be, what is the value at stake for sort of improving your demand forecasting? For example, a lot of businesses are doing demand forecasting on spreadsheets today. And what are some of the practical, tactical things that you can do to improve your forecasting? And there are also other things like opportunities to bring data together and a sort of roadmap for how to do that. So I think what we want to do is, just to summarize, is put something together where both the project gets some value, but also you get some value for giving up your time and some data. And so the final point is, what type of companies are we looking to work with? I think it's any food service operators that I would say medium to large scale that purchase from several large suppliers, so relatively concentrated supply chain, because we do need a sort of some level of data quantity to really identify the potential for solving this problem.
And what are the practical next steps that anybody interested would need to take?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to reach out to Rob or myself, and we'd set up a short conversation and perhaps a workshop where we can sort of brainstorm. And if we wanted to move forward, if it made sense for both of us, what we'd do is put together a plan and really document some practical objectives that we're trying to achieve and a timeline for achieving those. and figuring out, what resources are available on both sides to move the project forward.
Okay, thanks. And to tell us a bit more about demand planning, because I think for some operators, it's today a very live and very focused on issue, and perhaps others less so. Perhaps you could just talk for a few minutes about what is demand planning and what could operators get apart from the improvements in supply chain. What could they get in their businesses from really looking at that as a subject?
Yeah, so I can talk a bit. I could definitely talk a bit about demand planning from the perspective of what we've seen in the food retail space. So what really demand planning is all about is trying to estimate what is likely to be the consumer demand for your products, and how does that then translate into likely orders for your products to your customers. So it's really helping you to understand, for example, how much stock do you need to order? How much inventory do you need? And how much staff, what are your staffing levels needed to be? What are your promotions required? So it helps you to make decisions about your business, which will ultimately reduce costs and improve availability. And that is really the outcome that we're trying to measure for a business outcome for a demand planning solution is how can we make sure that we always have what the customer is likely to order so that we have satisfied customers and we have minimal waste. So what some of the opportunities that we've seen to improve that, and you'd be very surprised, even some very large manufacturers are still doing demand planning on spreadsheets, even though there are a lot of solutions out there for forecasting and demand planning. And there's no real problem with it necessarily being in a spreadsheet, but some of the issues are that updating the spreadsheet is a very manual process, so it doesn't tend to happen very often, which means that quite often the most recent data is the best indicator of what's likely to happen next. So if you're only updating that data sort of once a day or even every couple of days, then you're missing some big opportunities there. You also want to feed in things like planned recipe changes, any other promotions that are coming up, and quite often that's done only to a limited extent today. And in a spreadsheet, there's a limit to how sophisticated you can be. Whereas today there's a lot of advanced forecasting and machine learning models for improving forecasting performance. There's opportunity to introduce external data sources such as weather forecasts, traffic, and local event data, which could have big impact on what your demand is likely to be. And often, if forecasts are done in a spreadsheet, there's no way of tracking the accuracy of those forecasts on an ongoing basis. So, what are the opportunities for improving that forecasting model? And any good forecasting model is always learning and trying to optimize and improve itself. And how can we, produce a better forecast tomorrow? Where did we go wrong? We talked obviously a lot about sharing those forecasting models with your suppliers and your supply chain. And we've seen in other industries that this is, it's been happening for a long time, but when it does happen well, there's a lot of value to be gained. So, and obviously you don't want to share necessarily all of your data and all of your forecasts with all of your suppliers, because that's not really relevant. But there are certain ways of doing this that if you give visibility to your suppliers, they can better plan, and you can even have a common demand forecasting model rather than these individual siloed forecasting models happening. And what you would have essentially is a collaboration layer on top of the model, so that different planners in different parts of the supply chain are putting in their estimates and their domain specific knowledge of what that plan is likely to look like. Because sometimes, especially in retail, the suppliers have a better idea because they have more time to focus on their own product lines than the retailer does. So if you can tap into that insight across the supply chain, you're going to end up with a better demand plan.
Yeah, and I was really fascinated by Rob's comments about data going beyond the organization and the complexity that brings. But in truth, it seems to me that we already every time we're trading with a supplier, we're providing them with order data, we're providing them with invoicing data, we're providing them with payment data. So it's not like it's a completely alien concept, but I suspect that there may be quite a few people listening to this thinking, wow, this sounds like a big ask to start communicating in this way, and is it really going to deliver value? What are your comments around that process?
Yeah, I think firstly I'd say that, yeah, that's very true. And I think one of the biggest sort of questions that we've seen come up is, well, today when I share information with my suppliers and my supply chain, I decide on an individual basis, what information gets shared. And I think that's one of the sort of big leaps that we need to make, not just in people's willingness to do that, but also putting in place the systems and processes to allow it to happen where everyone is comfortable with the data being shared. And when this information is shared manually, it tends to end up in someone's email inbox in a certain department. And that particular piece of information, which might be very valuable to someone else in another department, isn't, they don't know that it exists, and there's no way of like seamlessly sharing it. So that is really what we're trying to achieve. But I think really the challenge, as I said, is trying to figure out, and I wouldn't say that we have the answer today. There are, even going back 20, 30 years, there's a lot of what I would say almost failed attempts to do this. So EDI is one of them, which a lot of the big retailers use, which is pretty cumbersome, and the way it's been implemented is not helpful for smaller suppliers. So the real question for us, and why we think this is a really interesting challenge, is we think that new technological advances in the cloud have made a solution possible. And we're not saying it's going to be easy, but in terms of practicalities, what we want to do is take people on a journey. So we don't want to transform, with a big bang transformation. We want to find tactical benefits of like sharing certain types of data and then build on that over time.
Thanks. And tell me about business size. Yeah, I can well imagine small businesses who might be listening to this today thinking, well, this isn't for me. This is all about big businesses, the compasses of this world, as I referred to earlier. Is that true?
I think there's some truth, and I mean you need a certain level of data to be able to do this well. But I think what we really want to understand is that the whole supply chain, that there are small businesses on one end quite often and large businesses on the other, right? And we want to make sure that a solution works for everyone. I think in terms of improving your demand planning, you need a decent amount of data, and one of the things that you need is you need to make sure that you're not just making small tactical purchases from lots of different suppliers. You have consistent historical purchase data that we can use to improve the models. And I think as long as you have that and you have that data available, then I think it's and I think there's a possibility that we can work together.
And do you think there are any risks here for anybody becoming involved? Is there, might their involvement in the project be a total waste of time?
So one of the things that's a very good point. I think one of the things we really want to do is make sure that we're very agile in the way that we work, so that if any of those risks become apparent at any point, we would rather call it sooner rather than later. I think the potential risks are the data not being suitable, but that is usually something that we can give you an answer, an arm's length answer of in a couple of weeks, right? So we're pretty confident that we can identify the risks fairly early in the project and get some clear signs about whether this is actually going to work or not. And I think at the very least, we can hopefully provide you with some advice on how to move things forward in your own organization. So Rob and myself have done quite a few digital transformation projects between ourselves. So hopefully there's some benefit of us working together, even if it's a short-term project.
Yeah, and finally, I guess quite a lot of operators feel today like they're already drowning in data, and here we are talking about creating a project that that may just raise the water level further. Is that a fair?
Yeah, and
concern?
it certainly is, and it's actually a concern that we've seen across clients in lots of different industries, and pretty much every new client that we see has that same issue. But I think what's really changed in the last 5-10 years, the advent of the cloud, is that there are so many new systems that if used well, they can improve your ability to collect and actually utilize data. So there's the cloud, which allows you to have a sort of pay-as-you-go model, if you like. So you don't have this big upfront infrastructure spend, but there's a lot of tools that have been built on top of the cloud, which allows us to deploy things very quickly and then see if there are results. And we can show value with a lot of different data sources collected into one central place in the cloud. Yeah, I would say the technology advantages have really helped to solve that problem of having lots of different disparate data sets, which can often feel like you're drowning in data.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Rob, if you just take yourself off mute we've got about a minute left. Is there anything else you want to add before we pass over to the next speaker?
No, I think we're excited about food service. I think the important thing to emphasize here is that there are progressions to this technology in food retail, but it's certainly not solved on that side of things either. And I think we think there will be new technologies that will have to be built for food service. So I think we're really posing the question more than having the answer at this point. But yeah, we're just keen to talk to more people, really.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Thanks both very much for a very, very interesting session. Looking forward to seeing how that fits into the rest of the morning's presentations. So without further ado, I'll hand back to you, Chris.
Thank you, everyone.
That's very kind, David, and thank you, Rob and Jonathan. That's really interesting. Delighted now to introduce Andrew Mayne, the founder of Certec. Many of you know from Andrew from his days when he ran Aramark as chief executive for the UK, and has founded Certec. Was it 3 years ago now, Andrew?
Yes, it is. It is.
Good. So many congratulations on that, and look forward to listening to what you've got to say.
Chris, thanks very much for the introduction. Let me just quickly share my screen. There we are. Okay. So let me just start very briefly off the back of Chris's introduction there to share just a little bit about Certec Exchange. As Chris said, we established Certec Exchange 3 years ago, and the mission was very much to see if we could create an ecosystem of digital technology firms whose solutions are really well matched to the needs of the underserved sectors of the service industry. And really we were inspired to do this by what I saw in the finance industry and in the pharmaceuticals industry with fintech and respectively pharmatech, where both these industries had ready-made ecosystems, or the players within these industries had ready-made ecosystems where they could go find fantastic tech that was really tailor-made for enabling their businesses to either address challenges that they were facing or to enable the businesses to grow faster and more profitably into the future. And so the team we've put together at Certec Exchange is really a global leadership team. We've been very fortunate to attract a number of former senior executives from major hospitality industry businesses from around the world. We've now got leadership members based in the US and Asia and in Europe, and combined they've got over 100 years leadership experience. We spend a lot of our time focused on sourcing and screening and selecting digital businesses that we can bring into the ecosystem. These businesses are really drawn from across the globe, quite literally from across the globe. But one of the things that we look for is that they've got a proven success in either their home market or in an adjacent industry segment, but with transferable applicability into the underserved sectors of the hospitality or the service industry that we're focused on. The other major part of our activity is working with these businesses to co-create their solutions for the market. You know, they've got some wonderfully enabled digital technology. They're led by incredibly smart digital natives. And what we bring to the mix is that deep industry understanding, deep industry knowledge, and a deep appreciation of the challenges and the unfulfilled opportunities that the underserved sectors of the service industry are looking to address. So that gives you a flavor of Certic Exchange. And now let me move to the topic of the day and supply chain management. And I'm going to illustrate the conversation here with examples from some of our digital partners. But let me start with our current perspective. And you know, there's a traditional view that I would share, which is what I've described here as the operator-centric supply chain. And you know, that's very much the way that the business operates traditionally, where the operator is at the center of procurement decisions, at selecting supply chain partners, and works with distributors or wholesalers, and bringing together the products of manufacturers, growers, and producers. And in fact, you could just about take a further view that says, actually, it's a two-stage process. There's a team in the traditional view, in the operator-centric view. There's a team rightfully focused on the sourcing of the product, and then there's a separate team that's then focused on engaging with the customer and how that product reaches the customer and the ultimate customer experience. But you know, our sense is that, and I think everybody sees it, there really are transformational forces in play. And just as David showed in his wonderful description of his father through to his grandson and how the world has changed, I think even in the last 10 years, and maybe even more recently than that, in the last 5 years, there's incredible transformational forces in play. And I saw it, you know, latterly in my career in Aramark, and I see it more than ever now, where customer demand has never been greater in terms of wanting information that's relevant to them as an individual, seeking really I use the word uber for extreme uber personalization, you know, really things really tailored for them. And I think beyond all that, and maybe the most recent emerging trend is customers looking to have a voice, to be able to participate in a conversation with the relevant parties about things that they care about. And finally, the thing that is really enabling this transformation to come into reality is digital technology. And as you bring these things together, then our suggestion is that there might be another view to consider when it comes to supply chain management, and that is a customer-centric supply ecosystem, where rather than having the customer at the end of the chain, and maybe even then a two-stage chain, rather there's a view that says actually the customer is right at the heart of the supply ecosystem. And it's not a linear process, because the customer is looking to engage, looking to be informed and to engage with participants further back in the supply chain than purely the operator themselves. And so with that thought in mind, with that thought in mind, I'd like to move to share with you how some operators are engaging with their customers and building profitable growth through the technology, the digital technology enablement of their supply ecosystem, and really kind of bringing to life some examples of how this is being done. So if I start first of all with the customer's demand for information that's relevant to me, and there's probably no better example of that than around the allergens and the importance of allergen information being able to be accessed by customers in their choice of what they're going to eat. With Natasha's law coming in later this year, the legal imperative has never been greater. But it's not just allergens, it's about calorific value, it's about price. The customers are eager to have information that is relevant to them as individuals. And so it's not just about the operator or the food service company or the hotel company or the restaurant chain. It's actually impacting every participant within the supply chain ecosystem, right back to the growers, the producers. And a great example of a company that's enabling this with their digital technology solution is our friends at Kitchen Cut, and their solution is very much focused on enabling a food production management system that amongst lots of other food production related features such as recipes and costings, etc., pulls source ingredient information all the way through to the digital menus that sit either on a customer's computer or on their phone. And so if, for example, a supplier changes the core ingredients in a product they've provided through, and that actually, as a result of that, they've introduced a fresh allergen into that product, then that information is simultaneously updated and all the way through the system, from the recipe all the way through to the menu that the customer has on their device, enabling them to make an informed decision, enabling them to put in their device to have stated the things that they're allergic to, and then being able to see the products that they're able to have safely. Again, just a great way of having that integrated solution that takes it all the way from the producer into the hands of the consumer in a seamless and an immediate way. The next example I want to share is on the Uber personalization, and there are loads of loyalty programs and reward schemes out in the market. They've been around for a generation. But the reality is that customers don't want to be bombarded with offers that are not relevant to them. And in fact, they want the opposite. They want to be recognized as individuals and for any offers to be tailored and personalized for them as an individual. And again, I want to illustrate this point by Eagle Eye Solutions, one of our other digital partners. And Eagle Eye Solutions, they have their origins, if you like, in the supermarket environment. And we all know of the super personalization that Tesco Club Card was able to provide to Tesco customers, and that the offers that they were able to provide to their customers were super personalized. But so Eagle Eye have taken that same approach to super personalization into the solution that they now bring to the market, and they've got an extensive supermarket clientele, the likes of Marks and Spencer's, Waitrose, Asda, and the Power Behind the Nectar card. But they're bringing that same technology to the food service industry, to hotels and to restaurants. And part of the magic of what they're able to do is to, if you take the supermarket example once more and think of the gondola ends that supermarkets have in their physical stores, and how they will market these to their suppliers to have the opportunity to promote their products. Well, in the same way, Eagle Eye enable that virtual gondola end as an opportunity for the operators, suppliers to trial new products and to reward customers with very personalized offers and again incentivize the operator's customers. So again, enabling the operator to be a window or a platform that enables the supply chain to connect directly with the customer in a digital way. The final element I wanted to bring to life in this one, in this presentation, was I think one of the strongest trends that's emerging in recent years, and that's of customers taking to social media to start a conversation or to engage in conversations about topics that are important to them, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or looking at things posted on Instagram. You know, the opportunity for customers to engage in conversations that are on things that are important to them, be it provenance, climate change, the environment, waste, ethical sourcing, a whole host of topics that are relevant to our industry. And you know, for operators, these social media platforms need to be monitored, hopefully to pick up any conversations that are taking place that are relevant to their business. And that's only part of the story, because the conversations that are taking place about their business are only the parts that they can see and they can be participating in. But there's other conversations that are taking place where their company isn't mentioned, but the consumers or the customers are engaging in with others, but that the company themselves have no visibility to. But if you imagine, as an operator, if you could establish digital forums and chats on topics that you knew were important to your customers, and that you could either include or even have these forums led by supply partners where it makes sense, and be able to bring that conversation, instead of these conversations taking place outside the tent, to be able to bring them inside your ecosystem and inside your business with your customers, then just how much more powerful could that be? And that takes me to one of our digital partners, Amity, and that their model enables you to do exactly that. Their technology enables you to do exactly that. They have an SDK plugin that essentially fits into a company's existing app and turns what's probably a transactional and informational app into the basis of a social platform, of a social network. And maybe a way I could bring that to life would be to give you the example of how Amity have done this for one of their clients, an airline, Air Asia, out in Asia. And Air Asia's app was very much like the apps that we see with British Airways or EasyJet, where you can book a flight, you use the app when you're at the airport to check in. And that was exactly what Air Asia had. But Air Asia were recognizing that there was a whole set of conversations amongst their customers taking place on Facebook, on Twitter, about holiday destinations, and they could occasionally pick up these conversations by being on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, but they had no means of participating in them, and even more important, they had no means of engaging with the customers and helping to connect customers with one another, to share experiences, and to potentially open up opportunities to create some incentives and rewards. And so AirAsia incorporated the Amity SDK kit and essentially added a chat button at the bottom of the app alongside the bookings, alongside check-in. And they set up forums that were focused on holiday destinations that AirAsia ran flights to. and engaged hotel partners in these forums, engaged local tourist activity partners in these conversations. And as a result, the traffic that they experienced, or they've experienced now on their app, has increased thousands-fold. They've been able to tailor personalized offers based on the people that they see involved in conversations, involved in where they're thinking of going, tailored offers to their potential customers. And as a result, created this really meaningful social network that is inside their network. It's inside their app. It's inside their community. And if you think of that then into our industry, the ability to enable our customers to engage in the topics that are important to them, to be able to engage with a supplier or with a producer about the provenance of the food, to engage in a forum about the sustainability of the seafood that the operator is providing. It transforms the whole levels of engagement and the whole the nature of the relationship that exists between potential customers, existing customers, and the operator, and the opportunity to just transform customer loyalty and engagement as a result of that. So as I move to the close, we'd assert that whilst the traditional view of supply chain management is still very important and still highly relevant, I think there's also a space that through embracing emerging customer demands and harnessing digital technology to address this and create a customer-centric perspective on supply management, and to ultimately unlock a whole new level of customer engagement and profitable growth moving forward. And that's it. Let me hand back to Chris and stop.
Thank you, Andrew. That was really interesting. Out of interest, how do you see localism impact on all this as well? Because there's a big debate about, particularly millennials, that they really want to see greater commitment to local communities, and then that knocks onto supply chain.
Yeah, I think that again, that there's something very much in that, in enabling. If you take that final point about Amity and creating that social engagement, or creating that social network, to bring that to life at a local level. So if you imagine, you know, an operator that has has Amity set up on a location by location basis, then you could easily have that forum set up where you're enabling the customers to engage with local suppliers. I think there's definitely a way to make that possible, and also to gauge the customer's reaction to the localization that you're bringing in, and to you know, you're getting the opportunity to have a conversation with your customers about both their desire for localization, what you then introduce by way of localization, and be able to bring to life for the customer the localization that you have within your supply chain. You know, there's an opportunity to engage or to create a conversation around that. Again, going back to the Amity example, could you imagine a chat group around localization, and allowing customers to participate in that? And
I think that's what's really exciting, though, isn't it? Because actually, purchasing has always been seen as being behind the scenes in operations, but
right.
Suddenly right out front, isn't it? And the consumer wants to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah. Look, I've seen firsthand with Amity how this is transforming the customer engagement through supply chains. They work with a major wholesaler in the subcontinent in India, and they're doing exactly what you've described there, where they've incorporated Amity into their app, and enabling these types of conversations to take place.
That's great. We'll stay online, Andrew. Let's bring Mark in, if that's okay, because I think we can get into a broader discussion here. And Mark, another Mark, are you there?
Hey there, Chris.
Perfect, great, thank you. Welcome to both of you. So for just a reminder, Mark Zorres is the founder of Winnow, and Mark Frankel is the obviously a director with Amadeus. And both have very different insights on this subject as well. But it is one of the, what Andrew's talking about is really one of the really interesting dimensions that's changing, isn't it? Is that the consumer and customer will make choices now based on purchasing and supply chain and sustainability.
Yeah, and I think I certainly think from what we've seen within Amadeus. So we operate within the NEC group up in Birmingham, and yeah, we've seen sort of that demand for information from our consumers just absolutely key. And where we've changed products, where we've changed product types, and just sort of talked a little bit more about sort of that whole sustainability and our food ethos. We've just seen the products grow in terms of our number of sales, and we've even seen an increase in average transaction value because people want to spend more because they really sort of pin that sort of information to value for money. And I think, you know, then the whole costing sort of goes out the window. It's truly seen as real value for money. That's really interesting, isn't it? Mark, do you have a Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it's just pick up on kind of a couple things there, right? So absolutely seeing that demand from the customer level. I think people are concerned not just now about sort of where their food comes from, but sort of a much broader picture of sustainability and how the operation works. Just one other observation that we're starting to see, and I know is going to really have an impact as things hopefully start to open up in the not too distant future here, is there's been obviously a massive shift to digital. And I also know that the industry players have been thinking about moving back and forth from a central production kitchen to kind of a local kitchen. And I think one thing that we need to be prepared for is frankly just more volatility in demand, because there's going to be more sources where you can actually get that food from. There's going to be more freedom that people have specifically in business and industry dining around when they're going to be in the office. And I suppose the question is, how are operators going to manage that volatility in demand? It's going to make the challenges around the bullwhip effect that was spoken about earlier, and the challenges around kind of how you buy and produce that much more important to be able to operate. And I think it's just going to have to raise what is needed to actually meet the right solutions for the customers.
Well, look, you're right, and you've gone ahead of my questions, so completely thrown me. But you're absolutely right, because it's going to challenge how models develop, because actually you can see that the market's going to almost split into having different models. The ones who have kitchens on site and do it still the traditional way, and then the operations that prefer to have this delivered in every day, and the CPU operation, as you rightly talk about, which is very likely to grow. I think it's been estimated that market could grow by about 20–25% over the next 5 years.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, after you, it's going to change models completely and how people look at this, isn't it?
Yeah, and what was talked about in one of the previous presentations is just this idea of kind of data silos, right? And when you move, I mean, this is obvious, right? But when you move from a sort of in operation production to that sort of central production kitchen, you're actually moving from one silo to sort of two. And at least what we see, of course, we sort of focus a lot on waste and kind of the efficiency of production. The further a chef is from that point of consumption, the more opportunities you have from waste. And on site, that can be as simple as, is the kitchen downstairs and is the serving happening upstairs, as opposed to the chef being right in front of it. Imagine then sort of exacerbating that and having one location with multiple different operations getting a level of demand with consumption perhaps being a little bit less transparent about what happens when it actually gets there.
Yeah, look, it's fascinating. Mark, your views on that?
Yeah, so technology is becoming more and more key and central to all of our industries, I think. And, you know, thinking about sort of, I mean, say, Mark, we work obviously with Winnow, as you know, sort of in our group, and trying to sort of coach sort of a chef team, if you like, to through change is often quite a challenge. So I think if you can kind of explain the benefits to them, if you can break it down, and sort of what we did, I think, was just sort of make it meaningful for people. So rather than just talking about sort of carbon reduction in tonnage, you know, we broke that down and sort of explained how many trips around the ring road in Birmingham, for instance, you know, in a family car that they're saving by doing what they're doing. And suddenly they're then invested in sort of trying to make that change. So it's those small little things that we sort of put in place that seem to have made that big difference. I think the other side of the coin is obviously, as we said before, and so the attentive thing's really interesting, is sort of, I suppose, giving a bit of our knowledge that we've got into the consumer's hand. So again, as I said, it's that value for money piece, but it's also, you know, when we list new products, you know, if we get it right, then we don't have to worry too much about wastage, because we know what our forecasting is. We've got our systems to make sure we've got the right product at the right place at the right time. If we're talking to our consumer and get our sort of menu development right as well, then we're just selling more rather than having a product that's not particularly fit for purpose. And unfortunately, at the end of service, unfortunately, is then sort of seen as surplus or, God forbid, waste. So it's bringing quite a number of systems together.
Well, I mean, isn't that, again, a really interesting dynamic that's happening? Everything is interconnected now in a way that's never been the case before. So we go back to Andrew's point about the consumer now has a voice almost directly to you, Mark, which probably wouldn't have been the case even two years ago. No,
you're absolutely right. And, you know, when you look at, you know, the likes of, I mean, say we it was just something silly, really. We just put 2-pint cups in our arenas. And it was about reducing sort of the amount of plastic. So, you know, rather than having 2 plastic cups, and, you know, we have to have recycled plastic cups because we can't have glass or tin due to sort of health and safety reasons. But say we introduced it thinking, you know, would people be happy with it? Is it the right thing? And we looked at Instagram and Facebook sort of on the day, and, you know, people are, you know, tweeting and Instaing pictures of themselves holding these big buckets of beer, and, you know, suddenly it was a big thing and everyone was really enjoying it. So it's small things like that, as you say, that, you know, not quite directly, but indirectly we can kind of look at social media and TripAdvisor, et cetera, and just refine and change and improve. And that's obviously a constant development.
Now, Andrew, as we said at the beginning, you founded Certec 3 years ago. How far have we come along the road to embracing technology? Because if we just go back 18 months, I think most of us thought we're lagging behind. How is that changing now?
Yeah, Chris, it's a great question. You know, the pandemic, everybody says, hey, listen, the pandemic has brought forward the digitization by a generation or by umpteen years. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, you know, there was a real scramble for lots of what we call tactical solutions, so remote ordering, remote pay, etc., and, you know, people scrambling to be in a position where they could open up their premises safely and engage with their customers in a safe way. I think that scrumming activity, I think, has passed, and what we're seeing now is quite a bit more thoughtfulness emerging around having more integrated solutions for particular stakeholder groups. And let me bring that to life. So you know, we've been working with a number of our digital partners to create an integrated employee engagement and empowerment platform solution, where we're bringing best-in-class partners that are focused on one particular aspect of engagement or empowerment, and do it brilliantly, but then hosting that in an API-enabled single platform. So the platform is provided by a partner in Asia. The shift scheduling is provided by a partner out of the US, and access to earned pay on demand is provided by a fantastic business here in the UK. Bringing it all together into a single integrated solution is really where big conversations are taking place. And then similarly on the customer front, you know, we without jumping ahead of ourselves, we've got some really interesting conversations taking place right now between Amity and Eagle Eye. So how do you bring, so Eagle Eye, a lot of their incentivization rewards activity is based on historic trading performance or historic customer trading activity. But if that same customer, and you can identify that customer, is engaging in conversations through Amity and perhaps conversations about things that they would aspire, that they might be aspiring to purchase, then that changes entirely the personalization that you can create when it comes to incentivizing and rewarding people, because you're now getting access not only to their historical trading activity, but what they might aspire to be doing given the opportunity going forward. And so,
yeah, so after you, please.
No. So all I'm saying there is I'm seeing maybe the next level of digital enablement, where it's bringing together a number of tactical solutions and bringing them together into something that's more holistic and more all-encompassing as the next level of digitization.
It's also fascinating, which I know Mark will also kind of gets, I guess, support, is that it's a mixture of globalization, because everything's global now, isn't it? Digital does open up that global marketplace. But at the same time, we have that battle about localism, where people do want local produce all the time as well, which is going to be the challenge of how we find that right balance. Mark, in terms of yourself, obviously you're working globally. What kind of progress are we really making on food waste? Can I ask? Are you using the technology for that?
Yeah. So I think there is progress. Frankly, it is also picking up steam. Of course, I wish it could always go faster, right? If you sort of look around the world, there is a group called Champions 12.3, which is really focused on kind of driving the food waste prevention agenda, and 12.3 is the sustainable development goal focused on halving food waste. You're seeing more and more operators taking forward and sort of taking it strategically, making that impact. And you're starting to see the sort of first global operators, some of the clients we work with, starting to hit those milestones of reducing food waste by 30% or sort of 50% across their entire business, which is great to kind of see that come through. I think what we're also seeing is we're starting to see an evolution of legislation. And it's not being prescriptive on kind of what you do with food waste, but it is starting to do things like exploring the ideas of mandated reporting on what level of food waste is actually occurring for possibly larger operators. Know that, that's something that potentially even could be coming down the pipe in the UK. We're seeing legislation around kind of how do you adopt legislation to avoid waste, meaning kind of, how do you make it easier to sort of donate food or sort of pass that food onward. We have a partnership with a group called Too Good To Go, great organization, just about kind of, if you think about what you do about food waste, first it's about preventing, but then it's about if you can't prevent it, how do you help it feed people when you actually have that stuff? So making sure that all of that is being fed. I'd close by saying that, this pandemic, I think we're all aware, has also brought about a tremendous amount of food insecurity for people. And it has made the issue of our food system and how we make the food system better, both that much more acute, but also has made the issue much more apparent to society. And what we're now starting to see as certain markets are starting to open back up, so Middle East, Asia, groups we work with out there, we're seeing that food waste is even more on the agenda. They've had they see it both as a sustainability mandate now in terms of what they're looking at, and frankly also as a imperative for them to get right to be able to operate more profitably coming out of this, given all the financial difficulties they've been facing. And the pockets of that, Middle East and Asia, but I think what's also interesting is just starting to see real uptick in resorts. If you look over in North America, vaccinated individuals now starting to book their resort holidays. There is that, the sort of poll question before, there is that pent up demand that when we can free ourselves of the virus underpinned by vaccines, that is going to, I believe, cause a tremendous boom in consumption, because frankly, there's just a lot of people out there who are sick and tired, much like myself, of getting locked up inside and want to get out in the sun. Yeah,
no, I agree on that. And do you think we're going to get collaboration? Because what you're talking about is actually a system that actually really collaborates at many different levels. Fair? Are we seeing more greater collaboration as we come out of this?
We certainly are collaborating more, right? We have a group of organizations that we sort of call the sort of food waste collective companies in the UK that are really focused on food waste and doing work there. We've begun to partner with other groups like EarthCheck, right? Sort of sustainability, specifically more focused on the hotel space. But for us, it's you know, Mark, you were talking about sort of communicating this stuff to customers. You know, how do we allow our customers to communicate the great work that they're doing on preventing food waste in a way that is relevant for the person at the till, right? And in the hotel space, EarthCheck is there as when I want to book for sustainable hospitality, or when I walk into a hotel, I want to know they're doing the right things. By us partnering up with them, we can reinforce that. So all of that, you know, comes together. We are more and more talking about sort of integration with our technology with different providers on site as well. So, you know, that, and Andrew, your point about, you know, how do you get these systems to not kind of operate independently? How do you get them to work together? Is there, but I'll also highlight that where we still are on things like recipe management, on things like menu management, you have a broad array of sophistication that operators have. You have certain operators that are really driving it home, and allergens are doing that. And frankly, you've got a bunch of operators that are still operating on spreadsheets, and it is very challenging to properly integrate with spreadsheets. They're, you know, nigh impossible. So kind of getting to that base level, frankly, as a message to the operators out there, then enables you to do so much more. But it's actually getting to that point, and changing the habits of the chefs in the kitchen can be a challenge sometimes to get them away from their sort of old behaviors into the new. And I think that's something that we all have to work on.
Yeah. Mark Frankel, your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a few things there, Mark. I mean, say when you, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, say we don't want to put food, you know, in the bin, you know, and when we do, we want to know why, you know. So is it the chef overproducing? Is it us not storing it correctly? God forbid, is it our supplier, you know, and their chill chain? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that say the AI sort of that Winnow gives us as a business that we can go and interrogate, and you know, we've seen improvement, you know, by measuring things, you know, by definition, you're going to improve. So, you know, that's one of the things that we've taken from this, is just that information, and sort of then how we decipher that and sort of give that to the teams is one thing. We then talk to our customers about, you know, our sustainability and our credentials, which is another thing. I kind of sort of, we kind of call it surplus food rather than waste, because until it actually goes in the bin, it's waste. And we want to try and reduce that as much as possible. One, because it's just the right thing to do, and two, commercially, it's the right thing to do. So, you know, when you look at, you know, we do all of our planning, we do all of our research, and the sun shines, we sell more water. You know, it's tipping it down with rain. Traditionally, we sell more tea and coffee. You know, so that's the sort of stuff, you know, on the day we can play with. But you know, we can't have shelves that look empty. We can't have shelves that look uninviting. So there is always that element that we're going to waste. You know, there's going to be stuff that's going to be surplus. So rather than just putting that in the bin, we do work with other charities. So, you know, we work with the likes of Olio, for instance, that have a whole bunch of volunteers. They come and take our surplus and distribute it to people that are less fortunate than us. And again, that has a really positive impact. It's really good from our CSR policy and our statements, but it's also, as I say, just the right thing to do. You know, we as buyers, we sit in a really difficult space. Chefs are demanding innovation. Chefs are demanding different things, and you know, they all want something slightly different. You know, working with a whole bunch of different executive chefs. Our consumers are telling us something different. Our exec boards are telling us something. So to try and sit there in the middle and try and just do the right thing is often quite a challenge. And coming out of this pandemic, and it's nice to say that we're coming out of it. You know, the purchasing teams are there to sort of, you know, it's suddenly that this, you know, you need to save money, you need to drive, you need to so to sort of try and sit and just absolutely have quality at the center of everything we do is still important, and that pushback I think is essential. And you know, we're quite good as a team in just discussing everything that we're doing, making sure that the customer sits right in the center of everything that we do as a business, And on the back of that, it's just about quality. So, you know, when we're looking at selecting our suppliers, it is about that service, it is about the quality, and the third stream is obviously about the commercials. We're also talking to our suppliers about what they're doing to make a change. So, you know, I think sustainability sits over the top, you know, and means many things to many people. But if you talk about, you know, reducing your carbon footprint, I think that then sort of means something a little bit more to a consumer. You know, and again, I think that's where we'll see businesses go more and more, is talk about carbon reduction. So Brewdog have been massively successful in not just reducing, but, you know, going negative. And we know that's a lot of carbon offsetting, and that absolutely has its place. But it's then also about the power that you pull from the grid. It's about talking to your suppliers, and it's about making sure that, you know, plastic is, you know, we're using responsible plastic. You know, we're not just sort of doing things just because we've not thought about it. So, you know, I do think the life of a buyer is getting harder and harder. You know, we talked about Natasha's law at the beginning of this. You know, whilst we have systems in place that are massively robust, you've still got that person on the till or that person interacting with the customer that we need to make sure we get that information to that person and in their hands. So, you know, if someone asks, has that got dairy? We can be absolutely sure it does. But we do try and source product that's got less and less of those 14 allergens. So, you know, we're again safer as a team and safer as a business. But yeah, I think technology has its part to play in also communicating to our customers in terms of, this is safe for you if, you know, if you can't have any of those 14 allergies.
Andrew, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, I think both Marks make terrific points, and I really want to come back on the comment about the legislation potentially driving some of the change. You know, again, Mark, you mentioned there the Natasha's law, but I remember as I was wrapping up at Aramark, the looming storm that we saw was the requirement to list the calorific content of each product. And you go back to your world of 20 different executive chefs, all with their own version of a particular recipe. I mean, honestly, that was the kind of thing that was keeping me awake at night in my old role. And that was one of the things I was very happy to not have to worry about moving forward. But the reality is it didn't go away. And, you know, and now with the allergen and Natasha's law, excuse me, you know, legislation is forcing, forcing is the wrong word, but it's driving, hopefully, to Mark, your point about driving businesses away from using spreadsheets and being compelled to become a more systemized process and more traceable rigor around the processes that they're implementing. And look, I think it comes back to what I said earlier, the having the customer at the center of it and being able to engage using digital technology to engage with the customer directly, that can be transformational. And you know, I think combining the legislative push and the customer pool together, digital in the middle of that is a key enabler of making that more systemized processes, be able to turn out much more meaningful information and engageable information for the consumer at the end. And that's really, for me, just opens up a whole world of new opportunities.
And I think someone mentioned earlier about, you know, data. You know, as sort of operators, we are not short of data. You know, we know who's visiting our sites, our venues. You know, anyone visiting a concert, we know roughly how much they spend. We know how long they stay here. You know, we've got a wealth of data. So, you know, we are looking at how we can pull all that together, and, you know, ideally, sort of have that almost automated ordering, you know, that forecasting, that demand planning that, again, the guys at Attentive mentioned. You know, how can we do our demand planning, or, you know, how can we automate that? So again, we can kind of take some of that sort of variance out, reduce what goes in the bin ultimately, and, you know, we don't run out of what on the shelves. You know, so products that are particularly high performing and the sun's shining, the system will automatically tell us, you know, order a bit more water, order a bit more ice. You know, people are going to drink more beer. Whatever it happens to be, it takes that human element away a little bit. And again, I think that will help us sort of transform our business and as I said before, measure it as well. And I think because of all the changes that are going on, I think trying to get capital from sort of exec boards, etc. I think we're finding it a little bit easier, only from the fact that I think it's slightly easier to sort of demonstrate first the need, so to stay compliant, but also that return on investment. This is what we're doing and this is why. But also future business. I think it's almost not. It's not a nice to do. It's a have to do if you want to sort of stay in business and want to develop your business. I think you need to continue to push, and also people see that you are committed to environmental issues. You are committed to legislation. You are just top of your game on all of the areas and knowledgeable. And as I said, I think with the people that talked already this morning, this is what's helping us as an operator sort of stay ahead of the curve.
It's an interesting one, those. After you, Andrew. No, please, after you.
No, I was just going to say there was a couple of things that again I'd like to come back on, and that whole consumer engagement. So, Mark, you talked there about, or a moment ago, about BrewDog and how impressive they were with their negative carbon footprint. And then I think about what Winnow were doing, and I think about so back this whole engaging the consumer and enabling the consumer to participate as a result of digital enablement in your business mission. And so I could envisage a situation where Winnow were working with an operator on the whole kind of waste management, the food waste and food waste minimization and other things you talked about, Mark, and that being a discussion forum within the chat enabled app that the operator's got. But that chat is maybe being moderated and influenced by yourself, Mark, or one of your team, and suddenly it's no longer the customer is unaware or semi-aware of what's going on. Actually, they're number one, they've got an awareness of what's going on. Number two, they're able to engage in the conversation about what's going on. And then back to the BrewDog example, actually take some pride that I'm helping to reduce the carbon emission or the food waste coming out of this operation, because I now understand exactly what the organization is, what the operator is trying to achieve with this, and I can now change my behaviors or modify my behaviors to actively support what's being done. It just changes it from silos into a much more interconnected and
But the really interesting piece, if we go back to the beginning of the poll question, that it was quite clearly split between those who don't think we're going to see much change in the supply chain and those who do. So there's two questions that come out of that, isn't there? Number one, if we think that from what you're saying that we are going to see this change, you're going to see some companies are going to make leaps ahead, and what others probably still maybe find a different path forward. But two, is there still then a big education that needs to take place on what has to happen? Who wants to start with that one? Mark, let's start with you.
Go on then. I think again it is that education piece, and I think we've seen through the pandemic, industries like ours have been decimated. We've been closed since the end of March last year. We're not alone in that. You see on the news, the amount of sort of hospitality jobs that have been lost. So you think again the skill within our industry is diminishing, probably by the day, which is a worry. You look at chefs that are now delivering and working in shops and probably not doing the hours that they used to do, and dare I say potentially getting paid similar amounts. Are we going to attract these guys back in the future? I think the same to be said with sort of the procurement side. We'll see buyers that unfortunately are no longer working. So I think that change might have, whilst absolutely necessary, I think that education piece will be massively important. When I was working as a chef in the kitchen, I knew the different cuts. I could break down a primal cut into the various different individual pieces. I think almost these days you ask if you take a steak out of a pack and ask sort of a younger chef or less experienced chef if they knew what it was, I'm not entirely sure that they do. So that's the education piece. I think we need to just remind ourselves, getting back to basics. You know, this is what good looks like. This is what the specification should be. And you know, going back to will we change I think the industry will change around us if we don't change with it. I think, as you said, Chris, quite rightly, I think businesses will absolutely be left behind. I think if you can't, if you worry about that change, I think, you know, your competitors could sort of steal a march on you. You know, again, being sort of really highly commercial about it, you know, if you can have a far more efficient supply chain, the likelihood is there's going to be efficiencies from a commercial point of view as well. So, you know, when we were looking at Brexit, sort of, you know, before the end of last year, you know, there was massive concerns in pricing, in fresh particularly, and obviously imported meats, fruit and veg, and those worries have not gone away. You know, there's still that concern. You know, what's that going to look like when we reopen? And as you say, that pent up demand, you know, suddenly that supply and demand, that friction and tension, I think will play its part. So I think if we don't embrace that technology, look at you know, sort of that data, and make sure that we're buying the right products, but also sort of, I suppose, embracing different purchasing techniques, whether that be e-tenders, e-auctions, and just trying to, again, be more efficient. And I think the one thing for me that I've taken out of this, as well as that whole partnership piece, you know, through tough times, we've really seen, you know, our supply partners, and I'm proud to say I can call them partners now, really stepped up and really supported us. And I think, you know, I've never worked closer with our suppliers and talked more honestly and more openly about our commercial and financial positions. And I think that will stand us in good stead in the future.
I mean, that is the point, though, isn't it? It is about partnership now. I mean, that's the dialogue. It has changed, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, if you can continue those open and honest relationships, you know, I've had far more time, obviously, to have those discussions. And, you know, I probably know my contacts better now than I did pre-COVID. Yeah. And, you know, we've formed that rapport is far tighter than has ever been before.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mark, sorry, the other Mark.
Yeah. So you asked two questions, right? Kind of the supply chain's going to change. Is it really? And kind of what's going to be the impact of that? And then, you know, suppliers or sort of, you know, operators who are adapting, you know, what's that look like, and kind of how are they running ahead against those that perhaps aren't as on the front foot to adapt? You know, I spoke in the beginning about how changes in how you deliver to your customers and how, frankly, your customers consume food and where they consume food. We all can recognize that that is a substantial change that the industry has gone through in this pandemic, and there will be, you know, habits that have been formed that will carry over into a post-pandemic world. And that itself is going to fundamentally change the supply chain. If that doesn't convince you, then, you know, that's there. But, you know, just the other thing we're seeing is as operators start to come back into business, the suppliers that they had might either have different products of different quality, or frankly might not even be there, and they have to look for new suppliers. And just to kind of sort of tell a little bit of story of what we're seeing out in Asia, because perhaps that is, you know, like in China and so forth, that's sort of opening much more open than actually what we have here, right? I mean, things that I now see in China hotels feels like pandemic is over and it never really happened. But you know, through our technology with Vision, we've been able to start to really dig into what are the products and what are the yield that's actually coming off of products that are coming through these suppliers. And frankly, we've seen a huge change, right? We have seen times where there's big spikes in what we call sort of trim waste, being able to go in and analyze what that is, realizing that even though they've gotten a different product for the same price and the procurement person feels like they've done their job to get that product to the customer, the yield on that is, you know, 20% less than sort of what it used to be. And, you know, it's an age-old thing that I hear when I get a procurement person and a chef in the same room, that sort of, you know, you got this cheaper, but I'm not getting the same product out of it. But I guess I would just say, at least what we're seeing worldwide, is that that's real. And that's happening at an accelerated pace as people open back up, because they're having to figure out what their new supply chain looks like. So, you know, not just, I think, are we going to see shifts in consumption, we are seeing shifts that have just happened in the supply chain through this pandemic because of a shakeout, and being mindful of what that means as operations kick back up. To then go to the second point around just sort of, those that are running ahead, I can really only speak to the conversations that we're having around food waste. And I can say that the conversations that we've been having around food waste have shifted from, I want to think about food waste in my larger locations where there's a big opportunity, to I need a holistic solution. I need a solution for every single kitchen to actually be able to go after that. And that's something else that we've been working with our clients on. And what we're seeing is that, and it won't name names, but we're seeing a number of operators basically looking at kind of how do they put something everywhere, which is a really exciting step forward. Has a demand that you can't have kind of the sort of highest end technology in every single location. You have to have a suite of solutions for every single kitchen. But that is happening. And I think that, just from what I'm hearing for other players in the industry, and sort of other, other technologies, is those types of conversations are also being had at a strategic level for other solutions. It's kind of, how do you get more consistency in your operation? How do you adopt the technologies to solve the problems and do it as a whole, as opposed to kind of in a piecemeal way?
That's really interesting. Andrew, your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, look, I think I'd just make a couple of brief comments. During the pandemic, I've been engaging with the wholesaler community as well. And, there's no question that the amount of value destruction that has taken place over the last 12 months, Mark, you talked there about some suppliers might not even be there anymore, 100%,
Yeah.
Suppliers, wholesalers. I mean, the economic carnage that the pandemic caused, particularly in the first wave, with produce just being lost, was just extraordinary. And where the pinch points were in the whole supply chain, and so with coming out of the pandemic, with that understanding that so much value has been destroyed over the last 12 months, there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, I'm not going to go back over the consumer centricity piece, but I think the consumer centricity piece opens up new opportunities. And again, Mark, you talked about how different people are, or how people have got different ways to consume their food, and then there's different delivery models, and the whole way in which the consumers consume their food and have it delivered to them or have it on premise. That again is going to change the economic model. Mm-hmm. So the need to rethink the whole supply chain up to that point in terms of where value, new sources of value can be created, is going to be really important. And the only way to do that is to have the consumer at the heart of that. But then the second part, and again, Mark, frankly, you talked about partnerships, and you're proud to say you consider your suppliers as partners now. I think coming out of this, there's a tremendous opportunity for collaborative advantage. We often talk about competitive advantage, and the book's written about competitive advantage. But when you're coming out of something like this, where there's been a reset on the value, on the economic value table, there's also an opportunity to rethink about how relationships operate and how players within an industry who traditionally compete take a step back and look at, are there opportunities for collaborative advantage? And by that, I'm looking at things which we would consider as table stakes. You don't win business because of table stakes. You don't win business because you've got the best auditing process or the best document management system. As an industry, if we come together and figure out what are the table stakes, and by collaborating with one another, are there ways to take cost out of the supply chain by tackling these table stakes in an industry-wide and both horizontally and vertically through the supply chain, and the competitive set at each stage of the supply chain? Are there ways to transform the economics?
Yeah, we're running out of time. I'm very conscious. But there's actually all three of you have made to me an interesting point that comes to me, is people have always said that during this period we haven't been able to build relationships and we haven't been able to make them stronger. But actually, it's always left me slightly bemused, because actually I think a lot of relationships have got far stronger, far more, which goes back to your point, Mark Frankel, far more open. And actually, I'd argue we've probably got a whole set of relationships that are far better than they ever were before, which has come from technology as well. So things are changing dramatically. Thank you all for your time. It's been really much appreciated. Well, it was a great discussion. So thank you, Mark, and Andrew. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your time. David, can I bring you back in now, please?
Hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you? Okay.
Yeah, very, very interesting discussions. Excellent. Thank you.
And your thoughts, your concluding thoughts on the discussion? Has anything struck you particularly?
Yeah, just to wind up, I think the first thing to say is that I think the purpose of or the role of supply chain management and procurement inside our sector has historically been perceived really as being the guys who ensure that there's availability of product and ensure that the cost is as low as it can get. That's been as simple as it's been viewed. And for that reason, I think supply chain has been a bit unsexy, really, for operators. And what this morning's conversation has really illuminated is that I think there is a definite switch out of being a tactical thing, which is just about making sure there's product in there at right cost, into a more strategic weapon for the business. And yeah, the thing I'd like to close on is what I've drawn from those conversations in relation to one of the questions that started with, where I think that 59% of people said it's no to there's going to be major change in supply chain. And I think there are a number of things that have emerged from the conversations. The first one would be, post-COVID supply is going to be different. Andrew was making the point that the structural damage to our sector is significant already. And there is going to be a polarization, I think, towards more specialist suppliers and the big suppliers, which is going to leave a bit of a gap in the middle of the market. There's going to be a lot more collaboration. Brexit is going to have a significant impact upon availability and cost of product as we move forward, both positive and negative, by the way. Sustainability is a major driver in the customer base right now, and that is going to impact what we import and what we don't, and what we choose to have to grow and produce locally. But it's also going to impact food standards, things like the reality is that a lot of pork produced in the UK, you think that's great, but it's fed on rainforest developed soy. So the understanding and being able to track that is really critical. Mark made the really great point about demand volatility, which is going to be a major change, not just because of what's going to be happening to the consumer, but also because our product offerings in hospitality have developed and morphed significantly over the last year. There was a big point about localism, which I thought was a fantastic one. And my only comment about localism would be that we have become used to this national hub and spoke distribution network. And the reality is that we are going to be moving into a place where actually local supply is just going to be a question of communication and distribution. We just need to bust that. And that will change. And then finally, this whole thing about customer demand for data and engagement, these are really, really critical things. And we're going to have to digitalize the supply chain for that reason, and also for margin and efficiency reasons. We no longer can afford to sit there and say we can afford to have all this waste in the supply chain that actually, because we can't see it, we don't bother looking at it. The reality is that retailers now are moving into our space, and they'll move into our space with their super efficient supply chains. So we've got to start focusing on that, or we won't be competitive. So that's where I think it's very, very valuable and very interesting, Chris.
Well, look, I think it's probably one of the most exciting times for your discipline, isn't it? I mean, it really is a period of dramatic evolution, isn't it?
Yeah, it's. I personally believe we'll see more change in our supply chain and the way that we manage them in the next 10 years than we've seen in the last 50.
That's brilliant. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to the audience for joining us, and hope you found that as fascinating as I have. And I think I've got more questions still, as always, with these great events than I had before. So I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
Thank you, Chris.